The Maiden of the Forest by pumpkinmoose22. Chapter 15. Kit awoke with the sun streaming through his window, the soft rays catching against the glass shoes, sending a soft glare into his eyes. A deep smile lit up his face, and a sigh escaped him as he thought of everything that had transpired. He couldn't believe that just yesterday he had awoken in the Nightingale Inn, pretending to be a member of the Royal Guard, without any idea who Ella really was, or if he'd ever find her. So much had happened. He had found his mystery princess, had been introduced to the most intelligent animals he'd ever met, become betrothed, and finished off the evening without having to deal with one hint of state business. It had been a day of magic. Kit's euphoria was interrupted, however, when the doors to his room were flung open.
"Your Majesty, forgive me for this rude interruption," Captain Alistair said as he strode into the room.
Kit sat up at once. "I'm sure you have a perfect explanation, Captain," he said with a questioning eyebrow. "Sire, it's the Lady Ella," Prudence said breathlessly, rushing into his chambers and stopping beside Captain Alistair. Kit flung the covers aside and leapt off the bed in nothing but a pair of trousers. "What is it? Is she all right?" he demanded, fully alert and unaware of the state of his dress in the presence of a lady. Prudence's face turned a bright red before she whizzed around with her back to him. Kit, confused by her behaviour, looked at the Captain Alistair, who threw him his crimson robe. Immediately understanding, Kit quickly covered himself up before demanding again, "What's happened to Ella?"
"That's just it, sir. We don't know," the captain replied.
"What do you mean?" "She's missing, Your Majesty," Prudence cried. "We went to wake her and couldn't find her anywhere." "What?" Kit shouted, running out of the room barefoot, his robe trailing along like some weird cape behind him. He reached her room in seconds, his eyes raking over the place fruitlessly. "Ella!" he called, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. Frowning, he twisted around to find the captain and Prudence running into the room, both of their chests heaving. "I want every guard to search for her. Search every inch of the grounds if you have to."
"Right away, Your Highness,"
Captain Alistair said with a hasty bow before disappearing. "Prudence, interrogate every servant you come across. Someone has to have seen her." "What are you going to do?" Prudence wondered. "I'm not going to sit around and do nothing," Kit replied, already making for the hall. "I'll search every inch of this palace if I have to." And so the hunt began, as every soldier, servant, and even the king himself ran everywhere in the castle, scourging every room, leaving no stone unturned. After searching the entire left wing of the palace without a trace of her, Kit was entertaining the horrible thought that maybe the Grand Duke had done something when a servant, dressed in a cook's uniform, rushed up to him. "Your Majesty!" he cried, coming to a halt. "I heard you were looking for a charming young lady with a hair of gold. Have you found her?" Kit demanded. "Yes, sire," the man wheezed. "She's in the kitchen." Without a word, Kit ran flat out down the hall, rushing around corners, weaving in and out of servants, nearly falling down the stairs in his haste to reach the kitchens below. At the bottom of the stairs, a crowd of servants, guards, and Octavius, the head butler, had gathered. It appeared as if they were afraid to enter the kitchen. "Move aside!" Kit demanded, and the crowd parted immediately after recognizing his voice. Kit rushed down the remaining stairs and came into the kitchen, only to stop abruptly. Standing there, with her back to him, her hands busy at work making something over the stove, was Ella. She wore the blue dress he had found her in back at the manor. The sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and her hair was tied back with a white frayed ribbon. She appeared to be flustered, her movements rapid and her soft singing inconstant. Kit noticed the other cooks in the room were eyeing her with apprehension, unsure of what to do. He furrowed his brow and became even more concerned when he noticed her move away from the stove to grab some other material she had gathered together from the pantry for whatever it was she was making. Seeing that the situation needed to be handled with delicacy, he silently motioned for not only the other cooks but the rest of the gathered staff, servants, and guards to clear the room. They got the message, and the cooks immediately went for the stairs, shutting the door behind them. A circular window was in each, and none could curb their curiosity, their eyes peering within to see what was about to take place. Kit, realizing that he wouldn't be able to keep their eyes away even if he threatened them with another glare, breathed a heavy sigh before turning his back on them and walking hesitantly over to where Ella stood. "Ella, darling, what are you doing?" he asked gently. Ella leapt out of her skin, gasping for breath. "Gracious!" she cried, holding her heart. the spoon that she had been stirring with flying out of hand. "Mr. Kit! What are you doing here?" Kit stared at her in confusion, for Ella appeared to be in a daze, petrified, her eyes round in terror. She suddenly became concerned with her appearance and began wiping her hands on her dress, trying to push stray strands of golden hair out of her face, which Kit noticed was somehow covered in ash. "Ella, are you all right?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "You know my name," she breathed. Sudden understanding filled her countenance. "It wasn't a dream." Kit took her hands and smiled reassuringly at her. "If you are talking about yesterday, it really wasn't, Ella." "You really came to the manor and took me away?" she gasped. "Yes." Her chest started heaving. She suddenly looked round as if taking in her surroundings for the first time. "I wondered why this kitchen looked so different." A terrible thought dawned, and Kit recaptured Ella's gaze before asking, "Ella, why did you come down to the kitchen?" A heavy blush stole over her, and she looked down, biting her lip. "I was making breakfast for my stepmother and stepsisters." So they were her family. And why were you making breakfast for them? "I always do," she whispered quietly, still looking at her feet, which Kit noticed were back in the pair of well-worn shoes she had had on yesterday. It was the first thing on the list. "You have to complete a list?" "Yes. Breakfast is first, then feeding the animals. After that I mend all the fireplaces, make the beds, gather the laundry, clear the tables since by then breakfast is over, and then I have whatever is left that they didn't eat before I have to do the afternoon chores. Depending on the day I have to work the yard, dust all surfaces, beat the rugs, clean the drapes, sweep and scrub the floors, finish the laundry, go down to fetch supplies, make lunch, clear the table, mend clothes, and complete any other tasks my stepmother and stepsisters give me each day. Make dinner, clean the table again, and finish the day by washing and drying the dishes before going to bed." Kit stared at her, dumbstruck. "You do all of this yourself?" he demanded. "Yes," Ella demanded, tears beginning to brim in her eyes. And she still wouldn't look at him. "And if I don't—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Ella?" Kit prompted. She shook her head again. "It's nothing," she breathed, turning away from him. As she did so, the skin just above her elbow was exposed, displaying to him a deep purple bruise. Kit's insides filled with anger. "Where did you get that?" he inquired. Ella gasped, covering the bruise and wincing in pain from the contact. She shook her head. "It's nothing," she repeated, her eyes widening as she took a step away from him. "Ella, did they hurt you?" Kit asked, trying not to show forth the anger that he was feeling. She swallowed, and the tears she had been trying to repress fell down her cheeks. Despite this, she tried to smile. "It's not so bad. Others have it worse, I'm sure." Kit looked up on her, his expression filled with compassion. His darling Ella. So good. So kind. He took a step towards her, but she shook her head. "Please," she begged. "Don't." "Ella, how long has this been happening?" he asked, staying where she was. She bit her lip. "I'm not sure I should say. It really isn't something to fuss over." "Ella, please." Kit gently prodded. "Tell me." She swallowed. Her voice was shaking as she mumbled. "It's been this way for about a year, since my father died. I'm used to it. I've learned that if I don't complete my tasks, that things are harder for me. I lose privileges and receive punishments." "Like what?" "They won't leave anything for me after they're done eating. On cold nights, my stepmother won't allow me to sleep by the dying embers of the hearth, but instead forced me to the attic, where she made me move into, shortly after my father left on the trip that claimed his life. And then there were the beatings. Just mild ones, she said hastily. Kit didn't believe the word mild fit the description of the size and colour of the bruise on her arm. It was obvious that Ella was afraid to say more. Almost as if she was expecting her stepmother to appear in the kitchen and do further harm. Feeling an overabundance of protection and love for her, Kit strode across the distance between them in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around her. Ella gasped, her body shaking from the sudden contact. Ella, I want to make something very clear, Kit said soothingly in her ear. That life is over. You are no longer a servant expected to do what's nigh impossible. You no longer have to be the first to rise and the last to sleep. You no longer have to sleep by the fireplace to keep warm. He suspected that she had slept by her fireplace last night, since she was covered in ash. And you will never have to worry about being punished again. A strangled cry escaped her, and she completely broke down, weeping in his arms. Burying her head into the crook of his neck, she latched onto him, allowing her emotions to be freely displayed. I've dreamt of this, she gasped between sobs, since I met you in the woods, when I thought you were just an apprentice. I dreamed that you would somehow appear and take me away back to the palace, where I would help you master your trade. But I never dared to allow it to become more than a dream. Will I really never have to go back? You won't send me away? Ella let out his own anguished cry as he tightened his hold on her. My darling, I would never do such a thing. I thought you wouldn't want me anymore. Why would I not? He asked incredulously. You can have anyone you want, she whispered, shaking uncontrollably in his arms. Why would you settle for me when you can marry a princess? Someone who has never had to scrub floors, whose skin is soft and unblemished. Someone who has been raised since birth to be a suitable companion for you. I cannot give you these things. I am nothing but a girl reduced to living in the cinders. Look at me. This morning I dressed in rags, not finery. Kit pulled away and lifted her chin. Her saddened eyes were filled with such loss it nearly broke his heart. But he could also see a secret longing that he wouldn't turn her away. That perhaps he would still take her as she was now. That she had confessed these things to him. Not caring that the servants and guards were watching this entire confrontation behind the closed doors, Kit gently pressed his lips against hers. At first she was frozen in shock, but then she responded, returning the kiss. Kit pulled away just enough for his forehead to rest against hers. You asked me if I would take you as you are, remember? This is my response. I look at you, and I see a woman who has crossed over an impossible furnace of affliction and come off conqueror. I see an unbroken spirit, fueled by unlimited kindness and outstanding courage. What you appear to be externally is not who you truly are. You, my sweet darling, are internally a queen. More specifically, my queen. Tears, unbidden, poured from her eyes. Searching his face, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek, before resting her forehead against his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve you. On the contrary, you deserve everything in the world, Kit corrected. And then, to everyone's surprise, he swept her off her feet, cradling her in his arms. She was as light as a feather, her frailty all the more real to him. What are you doing? She gasped. I am going to attempt to remedy the disgraceful amount of suffering you have received by treating you how you should be treated, Kit responded as he started towards the door. A king shouldn't carry anyone, Ella muttered, as though she didn't attempt to get out of his arms, though. Instead, she burrowed her head into his neck, one arm around his back while the other clutched onto his robe over his heart. What is a king if he cannot carry the people he loves when they need someone to carry them? He gently chided. Ella, let me take care of you. It's the least you deserve after doing so for countless others. The servants, seeing their king coming towards them, hastened to open the doors. Ella kept her face hidden from everyone, her body shaking in Kit's arms. Kit held his head up high, and didn't falter in his pace, or his hold on his bride-to-be the entire way back to her room. By now the entire palace guard, staff, and guild of servants had gathered in that corner of the palace, so it was like a silent parade for the young royal and future queen all the way back to Ella's room. Kit would occasionally kiss the top of Ella's head, not caring that his appearance and actions were on public display for all the men and women who served him. Captain Alistair and Prudence followed behind in silence, both having observed the entire scene that had just taken place. They fought their way to the kitchen doors. By the time Kit had reached her private chambers, Ella had fallen asleep. The mice, Mr. Lizard, and Mr. Goose were all sitting on her bed with an anxious air. At the sight of Ella, the mice let out several squeaks. Mr. Lizard scurried around in a couple of circles, and Mr. Goose flapped his wings several times. "Good gracious!" Prudence whispered in near panic, but Kit smiled. "Don't worry," he assured Ella's friends. "She's just had quite the ordeal. She's sleeping." "Sire, are you speaking to those animals?" Prudence gasped, her astonishment written clearly all over her face. "They are worried about Ella," Kit said simply. "I'd rather appease them than continue to let them fester. Now, Captain, I want you to return to that assignment I gave you yesterday. Prudence, please, kindly begin planning a ball for us. Both of you may return and report to me later this afternoon." "What are you going to be doing until then, Your Majesty?" Prudence wondered, though the captain already knew what he was going to say. "I am going to stay with Ella. There is more that we need to discuss, and I'd rather be here when she awakes than have another episode like this morning. She has been through a great deal, and it's going to take a little more time for her to heal than any of us may realise."
"We understand, Your Majesty," the captain said. "Come, Prudence, let's leave them be."
Prudence began to protest, but the captain gently took her hand and led her from the room. Kit sent the captain a grateful look before the doors were closed on, giving him, Ella, and the animals their privacy. Not wanting to wake her, Kit decided the best course of action was to keep her in his arms. Though not what would have been considered kosher for an unmarried man and woman, given their circumstances, Kit thought it no sin to slip onto the bed and sit against the pillows, with Ella resting in his arms. The animals made sure to move so to give them room. Ella took a staggered breath and cuddled even more into Kit's chest. The king smiled before kissing the top of her golden locks. Mr. Lizard crawled up onto one of Kit's knees, while the mice occupied the other. Mr. Goose flapped up onto the bed before settling against his thigh.
"What a strange sight," he mused.
"I never thought I'd see the day where I would be sitting on a bed surrounded by women while holding my fiancé.
She's really special to me, you know."
The mice wiggled their little noses, and Mr. Lizard tilted his head.
"I found her in the kitchen. None of us knew where she went, you see. I was frantic."
Kit chuckled to himself.
"She has disappeared on me several times before, so I confess I'm a little wary she might do so again. Oh, please forgive my state of appearance. When I learnt she was missing, I leapt from my bed in nothing but my trousers. Alistair, he's the captain of the guard and my best friend from childhood, gave me my robe. After that I went looking for her without another thought. She was making breakfast for her stepmother and stepsisters. I have been wondering about her relation between her and those awful women." "They are awful, aren't they?"
The mice let out several squeaks, the noise almost sounding like words. Mr. Lizard shuddered, and Mr. Goose nodded vigorously.
"Have they always treated Ella so poorly?"
Kit wondered.
All the animals nodded in unison.
The anger Kit felt earlier returned. What kind of monsters were they? Ella's father died, and they made her into a servant? She was grieving, and not only did they burden her with chores, but physically abused her as well. Kit couldn't even begin to imagine having to deal with what she had. When his father had passed, he was able to do as he pleased, sleep in when he wanted, and shirk from his responsibilities by passing them on to the Grand Duke. But Ella was forced to wake up early, sleep on the ground in front of a hearth, and suffer from cruel injustice.
"Those women will answer for their crimes," he said aloud with great conviction. "I will not allow them to hurt her ever again."
Jacqueline,
The small white mouse with brown spots kissed his knee, while the others squeaked out what Kit supposed were thank yous. "It's the least I can do for her," Kit muttered. "She's done more for me than she may ever know. When my father passed 3 weeks ago, I felt so lost. He and I were really close, you see, especially after my mother died. She passed several years ago. Not a day goes by that I don't think of her and my father. They were the best parents a boy could ask for, and remarkable rulers. I was afraid that I wouldn't be as good as a king as my father, but I feel differently now that I know Ella will be by my side. She was the hope I latched onto in the darkest times. With her, I think we will make this kingdom greater than it has ever been." Kit glanced down at Ella and wondered how long she would be sleeping. He didn't want to wake her anytime soon, even though he had tons of questions, so he filled his time by talking to the animals, telling them of his childhood, his passions, his worries now that he was king. In fact, he just talked about anything that crossed his mind. The mice, Mr. Lizard and Mr. Goose, were good listeners. They were very attentive, a politeness Kit rarely saw in human company, and by the time an hour had passed, he was sure he could understand the difference between mice laughter and the words they were trying to speak. Ella stirred into consciousness 2 hours later, her long lashes brushing against her cheeks several times, as she lifted her head to find him staring down at her. "Hello there," he greeted with a dazzling smile. Her brown eyes widened and her face flushed the colour of a cherry when she realised she was sitting in his lap with her hand resting against his bare chest. Anticipating what she was surely about to do, Kit kept his arms securely wrapped around her. "If I may be so bold to ask, would you not mind moving, Ella darling? The rest of us are quite comfortable." "But I'm sitting on top of you," she pointed out, clearly flustered. "And?" Kit asked with a small smirk lining his cheeks. It's not proper," Ella protested. Kit's smile faded a little. "Are you uncomfortable?" he asked hesitantly. Ella bit her lip, and Kit was pleased to see that she was trying to hide a smile. "Well, not really," she confessed. "Then I think we are all in agreement that moving wouldn't be in anyone's best interest," Kit said cheerfully, relaxing his grip on her. She didn't move. Pleased, he continued. "Now, how are you feeling?" Ella thought for a moment before giving him an honest answer. "Better. At least I didn't wake up believing I was still back at the manor." "Is that what happened this morning?" Ella nodded as she absentmindedly took one of his hands and started playing with his fingers. "I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed. After the servants left me alone, I went over to the fireplace and slept on the floor. I'm so used to waking at dawn that when I woke and the sun was shining through the windows of my room, I panicked. I rushed into the hall and frantically searched until I found the kitchen." "How on earth did you even find it without realising you were at the palace?" Kit wondered, concerned. "I'm not sure," Ella confessed. "It may have been that I smelt the food the cooks were making. I was in such a rush to do the usual morning routine that I suppose I just thought we were visiting another place." "Have you ever gone somewhere else before and had to serve your stepfamily?" "Yes, once. A couple of months ago, we travelled to visit one of my stepmother's old friends, a countess who lived near the deep woods in the eastern part of the kingdom. When we arrived, I was introduced as my stepmother's housekeeper, and spent the week when we were there with the other servants. It was nice to have people to help in the chores. I didn't feel quite as exhausted, and there was even some downtime when we would play a few games. I hadn't such fun since my father died. Well, minus the ball, of course. And I guess when I woke this morning, I figured we were visiting someone else. I wasn't really thinking straight since I was reliving what I thought was a dream that you had come to the manor and taken me away. I must have surprised the cooks a great deal. They probably find me strange." "Ella," Kit said cheaply, "I am sure the only thing they find you is impressive. A queen that can cook is rather uncommon." Ella frowned. "And probably considered disgraceful." "Nonsense, Ella. I never want you to change who you are. If you want to cook, cook. And if you want to clean something, I see no reason why you can't do that either. In fact, I'd happily roll up my sleeves and join you.
Oh, no! I don't think that would be appropriate, she immediately protested. Why? If a queen can clean, so surely a king can. Well, when you put it that way. Kit chuckled. Ella, I want to do everything with you. By your side as an equal. I don't want you to ever feel like you are beneath me in station or status. I am never going to treat you like how your stepmother and stepsisters did. I know that, she said earnestly. I've known that since the day we met. It's been a while since I encountered anyone with such kindness. You are so different from what I was used to. When I met you that day back in the woods, like a breath of fresh air. I'm sorry I kept the bruise hidden from you last night, she muttered, with an averted gaze. I didn't want you to worry. Well, I'm afraid it's too late for that. But is it so wrong to have someone who worries over you? No, she admitted sheepishly. It's actually rather nice. But your worry also consisted in thinking I wouldn't want you anymore. Yes, a foolish notion now I can see, since I'm not being governed solely by my emotions. You're not shallow like other men would be. Why, thank you for the compliment, my lady, Kit replied, squeezing her sides a little. You are most welcome, he said while giggling over his antics. Kit sobered, knowing they had reached a point where they had to discuss the hard things. Ella, I know it may be difficult to talk about, but I need to know what has transpired in your life since the death of your father. She stiffened immediately. I suppose that's fair, she muttered, the cheerfulness in her demeanour dampening from the sudden thought. You deserve to know. I have kept myself shrouded in mystery after all. Yes, you have. I can't tell you the hours I've spent trying to decipher what you meant by lizards and pumpkins and things. Ella laughed, and Kit was pleased to see her mood lighten a little. I am afraid there's a little more to explain before I can reach that point in the story. Well then, we had better get started, Kit surmised, hunkering down for the tale. All right, Ella muttered, smiling at his eagerness. But it's a sad one. I disagree, Kit muttered. Oh? Ella raised a questioning eyebrow. I see nothing sad about being rescued by an apprentice you met in the woods, who later turned out to be a king. Unless, of course, the rumours are true, that he is a tyrant who sucks the kindness out of his subjects. Ella laughed happily, remembering the ribbing she had given him from last night. Kit closed his eyes, cherishing the sound, for it in itself was music to his ears. Well, from what I have seen so far, the rumours have proved to be false. That's a relief, Kit replied impishly. One wouldn't want your happily ever after to be proven not so happy after all. But I know the ending. What I want is the beginning. With the lady's permission, of course. Ella smiled, shaking her head. You really know how to get what you want, don't you? All right. If this is going to be a story, you can't interrupt. She paused to glare adorably at him. You have my word, he promised. Very well. How does it go? Ah, yes. Once upon a time, in the middle of the country, there lived a family that may have just been the happiest you could ever come across. As Ella spoke, her voice was bittersweet, and a sad smile graced her lips. Kit listened with rapt attention, filled with anticipation to finally solve the mystery that was his Ella. She spoke of her mother, of her belief in everything extraordinary. She was the one who told Ella about fairy godmothers, how they lived with the rest of the fae folk deep in the woods, but when needed were called upon by the fates to help the families to which they were assigned. Ella had grown, believing it natural to converse with mice and geese and lizards, and horses as one would converse with people. She had believed in love, magic, and most important of family. Her parents treated the servants in their home as their own kin, and often spent many waking hours together. Her father was a tradesman, travelling all over the countryside with various wares to barter in the towns he came across. He would even venture into the neighbouring countries and bring home the most exotic gifts for Ella and her mother. When Ella was around the age of 12, her father brought home a paper butterfly. She got out of Kit's lap to fetch her box, showing him the butterfly, which was now ripped in half. What happened to it? He asked as she slid back onto his lap. He couldn't help interrupting. It was such a lovely thing.
and it was sad to see it now broken. My stepmother must have ripped it apart when she was hunting for the glass slipper I hid in the box. We'll have it mended, Kit promised. Ella smiled before going back to her tale. It was after she had received the butterfly that her mother collapsed from an unknown illness. Shortly before she died, her mother made her promise to heed her advice and always have courage and be kind, and that had been her life's mantra ever since. She and her father lived together for years, until one day he approached her with the request of being able to marry again for another chance at happiness. Though she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of him remarrying, Ella showed her support, and her father brought home her stepmother and stepsisters. The Lady Tremaine held many parties, didn't talk to the servants, and seemed to dislike Ella very much. One night, when a party was taking place, her father confessed that he would leave for another trip. Keeping to the standard of bringing something home for each of his girls, he asked for what she wanted, and her request was the first branch his shoulder brushed. Ella pulled the old stick from her box and showed it to Kit. It was returned to me with the news that he had died on the road, she whispered. While my stepmother worried how we would live, my stepsisters lamented they didn't get what they asked for. I mourned the reality that my father was never going to come home. To make ends meet, my stepmother dismissed the household and asked for me to take over their duties. She said they were a good way to distract me from my grief. I believed her. I happily did whatever tasks she and my stepsisters gave me, until I realized too late what they did to me. My stepmother had me move up to the attic before my father died, after I offered my room up to my stepsisters, since they seemed to have problems adjusting to the smallest bedroom. I had thought she would let me take theirs, but the attic was her suggestion. With the staff gone and me having to work to the brink of exhaustion, there would be days when I couldn't bring myself to climb up all those stairs and sleep in the attic, so I would sleep by the fireplace. One morning in late summer, almost a year after my father's death, the ash was heavy on my face, and I foolishly attempted to set the table for 4 instead of 3. It had been months since my last attempt to try to be a member of the family, so I decided to try again. My stepsisters inquired about my appearance and began making jests, thus bringing about the name Cinderella. My stepmother then demanded to know who the 4th setting was for, and blatantly dismissed the idea of me sitting with them when there was so much work for me to do. I took the set away into the kitchen to hide my tears from them, but didn't place it on the table correctly, and it shattered all over the floor. I bent to pick up the pieces, and noticed my distorted reflection on a copper pot. I thought of the name Cinderella and the cruelty I had endured for so long. Overcome, I left the house. A sudden shiver ran through Kit, and he had an idea of where her story was going. He waited on bated breath, however, remembering to keep his promise of remaining silent throughout the tale. I was riding through the woods when I came across a rather frightened stag. Ella confirmed, a warm smile suddenly gracing her face. I heard the hunting horns, and told him to run before they caught him. He did so. Then Galahad took off, and I soon attracted the attention of a rather chivalrous apprentice. He was quite handsome, you see, and I was immediately taken with him, for he showed me such incredible compassion. I was sad that he had to leave, but it was well, for I had left the home without permission, and knew I was going to receive a punishment because of it. The sooner I returned, the less the punishments would be, so in all it was better to have a short interlude with the apprentice than a long one. Kit started, opening his mouth to demand what her stepmother had done, but then remembered he wasn't supposed to interrupt. Ella answered his unspoken question anyway. They left nothing for me to eat, and I was mildly beaten, just a few bruises. But to me it wasn't so bad, because I had met someone wonderful. Thinking of him helped ease the pain. Kit kissed the side of her head and rubbed soothing circles over her coarse hands. Ella took a steady breath and continued. The next day I went into town, and the news came of a ball to be held at the palace, inviting all to attend. I was ecstatic, for I realized that seeing the apprentice again wasn't just a dream anymore, but a possibility. To add to my joy, he happened to leave me a bouquet of the most exquisite roses, and an invitation to dance with him upon that night. I rushed home in my excitement, and delivered the news of the ball. My stepmother ordered me to return to town to ask for 3 gowns to be made by the seamstress, in the hopes that maybe she was finally showing some kindness. I thought the 3rd gown was for me, but I was wrong. It was for her. I told my stepmother that I had no interest in the prince. Ella continued, causing Kit to smile, that I only wanted to see my friend. But she refused to have a 4th gown made for me. I didn't let this deter me, however, and in the little spare time I had, I made my own dress to wear from one of my mother's old gowns. On the night of the ball, I came down from the attic thinking that since the dress had cost my stepmother nothing, and I had completed all of my chores, that she would let me come. Instead, she decreed that she would not let me go, for I would be an embarrassment to her, and she wouldn't have the chance of her daughters gaining the prince's hand spoiled by some presents of a ragged servant girl. Then she and my stepsisters ripped my dress apart, ruining my handiwork, and left. Kit tightened their embrace. He couldn't believe her stepfamily had done so much to keep her from coming to him. How on earth had she shown up to the ball if they had ruined her dress and left her behind?
Needless to say, I was devastated, Ella said, but to Kit's surprise she was smiling. I started to cry, speaking to my mother in the heavens that I didn't believe anymore. And then the most remarkable thing happened. An old woman, dressed in a brown gown that looked like a tree, was sitting in the garden. A smile graced Kit's face as he started to surmise what was about to happen next, for he knew exactly who the woman was, though Ella didn't know that he did. Ella continued. She asked me why I was crying, and I told her it was nothing. Then she asked for some milk, and I immediately gave some to her. She had said that one might consider the milk to be nothing, but the kindness in which it was given was everything. Then she revealed that she was my fairy godmother, and that she was going to help me get to the ball. Her appearance transformed into that of a woman, into a stunning fairy. Her bright white gown, one of the most beautiful dresses I have ever seen. Her large staff had turned into a thin, elegant wand, and then she went about hunting in the garden for something that would do for a coach. She transformed a large pumpkin into a remarkable coach of golden glass, changed the mice into magnificent white stallions, and caused Mr. Lizard to change into a human footman, and Mr. Goose into a human coachman. Then she used the magic to transform my dress into the most beautiful blue gown I have ever seen. When she saw my shoes, she conjured a new pair completely made out of glass right on my feet, and to finish the effect, cast a spell so that my stepmother and stepsisters wouldn't recognize me. After getting into the carriage, she warned me that the spell would break at midnight, and all would be as it was before. I thought midnight was more than enough time to see my friend, the apprentice, and enjoy the ball. I arrived at the palace, and what was to my surprise and to find my apprentice was none other than the prince. That night became even more magical, as we spent the entire evening together until the clock signified the dawn of midnight. I felt terrible leaving him without a good explanation, for all I had told him was that I had to leave due to lizards and pumpkins and things. Kit smirked. But I was terrified of my stepmother finding that I was the one who had stolen any chances her daughters had with the prince. Kit couldn't help the scowl that formed on his face as he thought of the ridiculous stepsisters who had tried to gain his attention at the ball. Even though he had been distracted by Ella, he was conscious enough to discern that they had been positively dreadful. I ran away, Ella sighed, leaving my prince in his secret garden, wishing more than anything that I could stay with him, for he had captured my heart, even more than he had the day we had met. But I confess I was a coward for letting my fear propel me away from him. Even after he chased me, I still didn't heed his shouts to wait. In my haste, I lost one of my glass slippers on the castle steps, and when I saw that the prince was still pursuing, I knew that if he caught up to me, he would never let me go, and the spell would be broken, and I would be exposed. So I left one of my precious shoes, and rushed down the steps and rode away. Mr. Lizard managed to close the gate to prevent the soldiers from chasing us, and we were able to get quite a ways away from the town before the spell lifted, and we all returned to what we were before.
The only piece of magic that had been left to me was my glass slipper. I think it was a gift from my fairy godmother, a token of remembrance for my wonderful night I had had. I had just barely managed to meet my step-family back to the house and hide the shoe in the soot of the fireplace, right as they stormed in, and went on and on about some terrible girl who had stolen the shallow prince's heart. I hid my smile, and later that night wrote down everything that had happened in my journal, especially the parts about my handsome prince. The next day a page came to the house bringing the news of the king's death, and I mourned not only for his loss, but for the sorrow my prince was experiencing. I wanted nothing more than to come to him, to comfort him, for I knew that what it was to be an orphan. But I knew that I would never be allowed past the palace gates. Who would let a servant girl covered in soot cross over into royal grounds? Seeing this obstacle, I decided I would do something similar to what he had done for me. I wrote him a letter and picked wildflowers from a nearby field, since I couldn't afford to buy any. When I left them in our tree, though I wasn't sure if she would hear, I asked my fairy godmother to keep the flowers fresh, so he would receive something alive instead of dead. He had experienced enough death, and I wanted to give him something to hope for. I left the clearing where we had first met, and for the next 2 weeks, whenever I had time to go into town, I would check to see if he had visited. He hadn't, but I didn't fault him for that, because I understood that grief can be a heavy burden. I was pleased, however, to find that my request had been heard, and my fairy godmother had blessed the flowers to remain alive. Then, one day, a little over 2 weeks after the king's death, I had to go into town to see what was keeping my stepsisters. They had gone shopping, and my stepmother demanded I go and retrieve them, before they could spend all of their allowance. On my way I passed through the clearing, and found, to my joy, that the flowers and note were gone. Elated, I arrived in the town, and while there, a royal proclamation was given that the new king would marry the mystery princess, who wore glass slippers to the ball. Upon this news, I finally saw that there was an end to the horrible life I'd lived the past year. The new king had handed me the key to the cage I was locked in, and loving him completely, I immediately stole upon the idea of declaring I was the one he was looking for. But then I realized I was obviously no princess, and the decree had stated a princess who the king was looking for. Deciding the only way to prove I was the mystery princess was to show him that I had one of the glass slippers, I mounted Galahad and rode for home. I should have realized that my stepmother had been suspicious of my involvement at the ball from the beginning, and that she had ordered me out of the house so she could search through my things. Upon my return, I rushed up to the attic and lifted the floorboard where I kept my box of precious things, only to find they had been rummaged through and that the shoe was missing. My stepmother then alerted me to her presence, and told me that she would gladly let me go to the palace and marry the king on the condition that I would make her the royal housekeeper, so she would be given the power to manage and rule the kingdom the way she saw fit. I defied her, stating I would protect the king from her and the kingdom even at the cost of my own happiness. She then broke the shoe by striking it against the stone wall and locking me in the attic. For the next week I was let out to do the chores under her strict supervision, only to be locked right back up after they were all done. She wouldn't let me leave the house for anything, but I cried to sleep every night. But even though my life was worse than it had been before, I was happy that my prince, or rather my king, was safe from the cruelty I had to endure by my stepmother's hand. To keep myself from giving in to despair, I would sing my mother's lullaby that she often sang to me when putting me to bed, and think of all the encounters I had had with the king. Then, one day, I was up in the attic, and I heard someone arrive downstairs. I didn't pay much mind, for surely whoever it wasn't there to see me. So I retreated into my fantasies, singing and dancing as if reliving the night of the ball. When I reminisced about the secret garden that the king had shown me, I went to the window. I didn't even notice when the mice had opened it. I was actually taken very much by surprise when the door to the attic opened and a man dressed in royal attire entered with my stepmother. He told me that I was required to present myself to His Majesty, and I could hardly believe what was happening. My stepmother immediately forbade me from stating that she was my mother. Righteous anger caused the words to spill from my mouth,
as I boldly defied her, saying that she never was, nor would she ever be, my mother. After I left the attic, walking down the stairs, knowing that I was dressed in rags and covered in soot, and about to meet the man I loved more than life itself, she paused to take a shuddering breath. You know the rest of the story. I was rescued from a life I never thought I'd escape from. My apprentice turned king had come for me, with a promise that we would live happily ever after. Kit sat in silence, taking everything in. It was amazing to hear her side of the story, to see how everything weaved together. So his suspicions concerning magic had been right all along. Her fairy godmother had not only made sure she had arrived at the ball, and kept the forget-me-nots alive, she had also urged Kit to marry for love, fixing the shoe that was broken, and advised him to leave the palace and observe the Grand Duke's actions for his own eyes. By following her advice, he was present when Ella's voice had been heard, enabling him to find her. The fairy godmother had been weaving her way through both of their lives, to ensure they had reached this point together. How incredibly remarkable, he muttered to himself. What is? Ella asked. My darling, I'm sure you realize your journey to get to me was helped by magic, but I don't think you are aware that it was also involved for me to find you. Ella's adorable brow furrowed. Whatever do you mean, Kit? Do you have a fairy godmother too? On the contrary. Your fairy godmother has graced me with her presence before and after the ball. She has! Ella cried, surprised. Kit laughed. Now it is my turn to share bits and pieces with you. He told her of the first time he had met the old woman, who claimed that he should fight against his father and marry for love. Of how she had appeared to him after the search for his princess had begun, to fix the broken heel the Grand Duke had presented to him, and the warning she had given. If she hadn't hinted that I join in the search, I don't believe I would have found you, Kit finished breathlessly. Ella shed a few tears as she joyfully cried, She truly is wonderful. I had no idea she was so busy in helping our cause along. And she fixed the shoe my stepmother broke. Wait, does that mean... Ella smiled at her. You have them both, she gasped. I do, he confirmed, but I fear they aren't meant for my feet. I wondered if you would like to have them, my lady, seeing as you would put them to better use than I. Ella threw her arms around him, laughing joyfully. I never thought I'd be able to wear them again, she cried. This is the greatest news. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Kit laughed as he cradled her in his arms. Before happily returning the kiss she suddenly graced upon him. As he conveyed his passion, he couldn't help but thank every power above for Ella. Not only was she his sunlight and his happily ever after, but indefinitely she was his once in a lifetime. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that because I did. What a chapter, emotional roller coaster, and the catch up between them both. There's a running joke online that the prince would find Ella insane after her telling him that she was helped by magic, the whole pumpkins and mice thing. But I actually like the idea of the fairy godmother weaving them together. I'm sorry if I haven't done this story for a while. It wasn't getting much traction, and I wanted to get a few more subscribers to listen in before I did this again. You know, rekindle some interest. I hope you guys understand that. It's odd being on the algorithm. You have to get views quickly. And I don't think I'm on it very much at all yet. Though admittedly, if you search up Avengers Audio Fix, I'm everywhere, which kind of feels great. I know that sounds egotistical, but it's nice to know that my work is recognised. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!